Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books in Bytes, where we take a deep dive into the insights from incredible books. Today we're unpacking Carlo D'Este's Decision in Normandy, the unwritten story of Montgomery and D'Este. Our mission really is to peel back some of those layers of, the accepted history. We want to truly unpack the unpurged stories and maybe some of the bitter controversies that swirl around the Normandy campaign. And we'll have a particular focus on the generalship, the role, really, of Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery.
That's exactly right. Because, so much has been written about D-Day itself. But D'Este's work, it really goes deeper. It aims to reveal what he actually calls the unwritten story. So that means digging into the intense disputes among the top brass, bringing out hidden perspectives from lower down the ranks. And crucially, he uses a lot of new documentary evidence, stuff just released from British and American archives. So this deep dive, it isn't just recounting battles, it's fundamentally exploring these often opposing military and political ideas that, really shaped Allied cooperation. We'll look at everything from the initial planning, the disagreements there,
right,
through the landings themselves, the brutal, unexpected challenges on the ground, the manpower issues.
which were huge.
Huge. And of course, those lasting controversies, particularly around the breakout and that infamous Falaise Gap.
Okay, let's get into it then. Because D'Este uncovers some genuinely fascinating details for some surprising facts about what was, let's face it, one of the most complex military operations ever. And what he shows, I think, is that the road to victory in Normandy was far from straightforward. To really get what D'Este is revealing, we kind of need to set the scene first, go back a bit to the years before the invasion. Britain, back in 39-40.
Yeah.
Honestly, they were woefully unprepared for the kind of war Hitler was unleashing. The army was ill-equipped, thinking was pretty static, kind of old-fashioned, really. And crucial things like tank warfare had been sort of neglected, just as Germany was perfecting its blitzkrieg tactics.
Absolutely. And after that terrible evacuation from Dunkirk, Churchill took, some tentative first steps to deal with these huge problems. He set up the Combined Operations Staff. It had a dual mission, really. Plan commando raids, keep the pressure on, and maybe even more importantly, start developing and testing amphibious vehicles and the actual doctrine, the sort of core principles for amphibious warfare. D'Este makes it clear how much Churchill was haunted by Gallipoli in 1915.
A costly failure. And he, as First Lord of the Admiralty then, bore a lot of responsibility. That shadow, it really loomed large over any talk of crossing the Channel again.
It certainly did. So jump forward to late 41. America enters the war after Pearl Harbor. A huge moment. Britain's not fighting alone anymore. But even with this massive potential boost American manpower, logistics, a big strategic argument pops up. Where and when do you launch the second front? And the Allies argued about this for, nearly 2 years. Churchill, for instance, he liked the tightening ring idea, pushing in the Mediterranean, like Operation Torch in North Africa, which is totally different from the American view, particularly Marshall, who kept insisting on a decisive cross-channel attack.
Right, and D'Este really highlights how that whole argument was massively affected by the Dieppe raid in August 42, which was just disastrous. It was meant as a sort of reconnaissance in force, but it proved tragically that a cross-channel landing just wasn't feasible then. The cost was huge, over 1,000 British and Canadian lives, 106 RAF planes lost.
That one day, that really convinced Churchill and the British chiefs to, steer clear of big cross-channel stuff for quite a while. It definitely reinforced that British preference for a slower, more indirect approach.
Okay, so that brings us to 1943, and the real beginning of Operation Overlord, the invasion everyone was waiting for. This is when Cossack, that's Chief of Staff to the Supreme Allied Commander, gets set up, tasked specifically with planning this massive invasion, aiming for May 1944. It's just unprecedented in complexity. And D'Este points out how initially they had a serious lack of resources, like not enough assault craft for immediate backup if things went wrong. A huge gamble.
Yeah, a massive gamble. And that's exactly where Montgomery comes in. He's appointed ground commander in December 43. D'Este shows how he immediately started making big changes to the Cossack plan. He insisted, famously, on landing in that Cambio area, saw it as vital for pushing forward aggressively, and crucially, he added the landing on the Contend Peninsula to grab the port of Cherbourg. Logistics?
Absolutely vital.
And one of his biggest changes was pushing for airborne troops on both flanks, not just one. General Bradley then fought to expand that, getting approval for 2 whole U.S. airborne divisions. Now, planners were definitely worried about spreading forces too thin.
Understandably.
But Monty saw Cherbourg and building up forces quickly as absolutely essential for the whole thing to work.
Now, what D'Este uncovers next about Montgomery's vision,
Yeah.
it's a real eye-opener. How did he actually sell his version of the plan? He really stamped his authority on it with his master plan, didn't he? Presented at Exercise Thunderclap in April 44 and again at that St. Paul's school briefing in May. He just projected total confidence, saying things like, this is a perfectly normal operation which is certain of success. He even had his prescription for success.
Yeah.
Violence of assault, massive supporting fire simplicity, and a robust mentality. It's quite something how he built that certainty.
But D'Este digs right into the controversy around Monty's actual strategic intent, especially this Cayenne as a hinge debate. He points out these conflicting maps showing projected front lines, phase lines. One from April shows the pivot on Cayenne, but another, supposedly from May, has the pivot way south at Argenton. And the key insight D'Este offers is how Montgomery seems to have, well, tailored his presentations, especially at St. Paul's, maybe to get the Air Force on board. While his real plan, which probably evolved anyway, was perhaps kept a bit more under wraps. D'Este argues that an 8th May planning document is the real key to understanding Monty's post-D-Day intentions, showing his focus was really on expanding the beachhead, grabbing ports from the flanks.
So was it deliberate obfuscation or just adapting to reality?
D'Este suggests it was often a bit of both. Pragmatic, sure, but also a kind of strategic ambiguity that definitely caused friction later on.
It's quite powerful imagining Churchill, the great wartime leader, dealing with that level of fear about overlords. This really captures that human side. He points out Churchill's own early worries, talking about visions of beaches choked with the bodies of the flower of British and American youth.
That chilling stuff.
And of the tides running red of their blood. But despite that fear, he fully committed. Told Eisenhower just before D-Day, I am in this thing with you to the end, and if it fails, we will go down together.
And the mood right before D-Day, it was incredibly tense. Sir Alan Brooke, the CIGS, was still gloomy the night before, feared it could be the most ghastly disaster of the whole war. Okay. Eisenhower, too, you can feel the strain D'Este describes, making that final go decision. It all depended on that narrow weather window, didn't it? For the airborne drops, the low-tide landings. Only really 3 days in early June were viable. Any major delay could have wrecked the whole thing.
And then, June 6, 1944, D-Day. D'Este makes it clear the landings were this mix of, well, stunning success and near catastrophe. Shows the sheer chance involved in battle. Utah Beach, the Americans achieved complete surprise, faced little opposition, got inland quickly. But Omaha Beach, spearheaded by the 1st and 29th Divisions, it was just a nightmare.
A total nightmare.
Allied intelligence had tragically missed that the German 352nd Division had moved in. And those formidable bluffs, plus the bombardment being ineffective, it left the Germans largely untouched, ready to fire down.
Yeah, the casualties were horrific on Omaha. Over 2,000 dead, wounded, missing, compared to Utah, which had fewer than 200. Stark difference. And making things worse for the Allies were some huge German mistakes. D'Este really emphasizes this. Their obsession with the Pas de Calais, thanks partly to brilliant Allied deception, meant key panzer reserves were held miles away.
Right, fortitude.
Exactly. And the command structure on the German side, OB West, it was a mess. Hitler kept direct control over those panzer reserves, which meant fatal delays in getting them into the fight. Rommel being away on leave didn't help either.
It's incredible timing.
Yeah. The 21st Panzer, for instance, the only unit really capable of hitting the Cayenne flank hard early on, it got into action way too late because Hitler wouldn't release it initially.
So, after those brutal first landings, the fight was far from over. D'Este really takes us into this critical battle for the foothold, especially around Cayenne, and why it got so tough so quickly. He highlights the, disappointing early performance of the British 3rd Division near Caen, and the Germans, particularly 21st Panzer, resisting much more strongly than expected. Caen, which was meant to be a D-Day objective, just stayed in German hands, really messing up the initial Allied timetable.
And a massive factor, D'Este points out again and again, was the terrain, the bocage.
Ah, yes, the hedgerows.
Exactly. These dense hedgerows, woods, streams, steep little hills. Normandy wasn't flat fields. Imagine fighting through a maze where every field is a natural fortress. It massively favored the defenders. The Germans used it brilliantly to blunt Allied advantages, especially tanks and air power. Post-war studies showed it cut air attack effectiveness by up to 75%.
75%.
Yeah. It turned potential tank battles into these endless, brutal slogs for tiny patches of ground.
With Caen still not taken right after D-Day, Montgomery's immediate problem was how to get it. He wanted to renew the assault fast. But then miserable weather in the Channel held up key reinforcements, like the Highland Division, the 4th Armored Brigade. So his dilemma was secure Caen before the Germans dug in even deeper. But the weather and the terrain kept throwing wrenches in the works.
Which led to a really significant shift in Monty's strategy. He opted for a double envelopment of Caen, basically trying to pinch it off from both sides. And this led to that famous or infamous right hook attempt at Villers-Bocage, which resulted in one of the most dramatic setbacks D'Este details. SS Captain Michael Whitman,
The Tiger Tank Ace.
that's him. In one Tiger tank, he basically wiped out the lead elements of the British 22nd Armored Brigade in like 5 minutes.
Unbelievable.
An incredible tactical shock. It forced the British back from Villers-Bocage, cost them dearly. A sharp lesson about German tactical skill in their heavy tanks.
And this setback, along with others, started feeding these controversies about Montgomery being too cautious, a theme D'Este really explores. His public story, his master plan seemed to shift. From talking about breakthrough, it became more about a containing strategy around Caen, drawing German armor onto the British-Canadian front.
Letting the Americans break out.
Exactly. And Brigadier Edgar "Bill" Williams, Monty's own intelligence chief, had that sharp observation. Montgomery wins his battles afterwards.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. D'Este suggests this reveals a pattern. Monty might plan for X, but if Y happened, he'd claim Y was the plan all along, constantly reframing things after the event.
And adding to all these problems was the severe and rapidly worsening manpower dilemma. D'Este flags this as absolutely critical for the British. They were running out of trained infantry replacements fast. Actual casualties were nearly 80% higher than they'd planned for.
80%? That's staggering.
It really was. And the British regimental system, insisting that specific replacements go only to specific regiments, it made the problem worse. It led to cannibalization, pulling experienced soldiers out of existing units to plug gaps elsewhere, weakening the original units.
A vicious cycle.
Totally. And on top of that, some veteran British divisions, the 50th, the 7th Armored, the Desert Rats, the 51st Highland, weren't performing as expected. Maybe war weariness, maybe leadership issues. Montgomery ended up relieving several senior commanders. It was a deep, complex crisis.
Okay, so this brings us to Operation EPSM. This was Montgomery's third big go at either capturing Canton or at least cutting it off, focusing on the Odin River area and that key spot, Hill 112.
That's right, launched late June.
And D'Este describes really heavy fighting, some initial gains, but ultimately EPSM didn't achieve its main goals, either seizing the Cantonese plain or fully isolating the city. It just hammered home again how incredibly tough the German defense was. Monty was still stuck, really, trying to find a way to break that Caen logjam and open things up.
The Germans were exhausted, no doubt, but they just kept holding on stubbornly. But then came the moment that really shifted the momentum. D'Este analyzes this really well. Bradley, on the American side, took the initiative with Operation Cobra.
The big bombing.
Massive saturation bombing, followed by a concentrated ground attack. Though, tragically not without problems, those short bombing incidents, hitting Allied troops, awful friendly fire, including Lieutenant General McNair, the highest-ranking Allied officer killed in Normandy.
Terrible. A horrific price.
But despite those awful setbacks, Cobra worked. It was decisive. It finally shattered the German line on the western flank.
And this, D'Este shows, is what unleashed Patton's Third Army.
Exactly. They poured through the gap, drove rapidly into Brittany, creating this wide-open southern flank.
A dramatic turnaround.
Completely changed the game, caught the Germans totally off balance.
So what did this breakthrough mean for the bigger picture? Well, it set the stage for the Great Encirclement, and that huge controversy D'Este focuses on, the Falaise Gap.
Right. Hitler makes this colossal blunder, ordering a counterattack at Mortain.
Playing right into their hands.
Precisely. Sending his 7th Army straight into what Bradley turned into a massive Allied trap. The squeeze was on. You had Operation Totalize, the Canadians pushing south towards Falaise.
From the north.
And Operation Blue Coat, the British pushing hard on the western flank. The jaws were definitely closing.
Which brings us to Bradley's decision. Hugely controversial.
Yeah.
Halting Patton's XV Corps at Argentan.
Yes. Stopping them from driving north to meet the Canadians coming south near Falaise, which might have closed the trap sooner.
Bradley's reason was, supposedly, to avoid friendly fire, a collision of forces in the confusion.
That was the official line.
But the result, D'Este shows, was that although the Germans were hammered, a significant number managed to escape eastwards through that gap between Argentan and Falaise.
They did. Though the losses inside the pocket were still catastrophic for the Germans. Maybe 10,000 killed, 50,000 captured. Eisenhower called it one of the greatest killing grounds of any of the war areas.
And the arguments over who was responsible for the gap not being closed tighter, they rage on, don't they? D'Este really digs into this.
He does. Bradley later flat out blamed Montgomery. Said Monty didn't push the Canadians hard enough from the north to close the gap at Falaise. Montgomery, meanwhile, gave shifting explanations, sometimes inconsistent. Later claimed he always intended to push the Germans back toward the Seine River, a long envelopment, he called it, rather than trying for a tight, short envelopment at Falaise-Argenton.
So how does D'Este judge this? Who does he think was more credible?
Well, D'Este paints a complex picture of Montgomery. He acknowledges Monty could be, frankly, deceitful, boastful, brilliant at creating his own myth, but also, undeniably, a highly dedicated and effective professional soldier who cared deeply about his men's lives. So the ambiguity around Falaise, it's sort of central to the whole Montgomery enigma D'Este explores.
And moving beyond Normandy itself, D'Este shows these strategic arguments didn't just stop there, did they?
Not at all. Montgomery famously pushed for his pencil-like thrust, a single, narrow, powerful drive straight for the Ruhr, maybe even Berlin. Thought it could end the war fast.
It's ambitious.
Very. But Eisenhower ultimately rejected it, opted for his broad front strategy advancing across the whole line. D'Este suggests Ike's reasoning was partly logistical. He knew a narrow thrust couldn't be supplied properly, it'd be cut off. But also there was just growing friction and, frankly, distrust between him and Montgomery by then.
Which leads us nicely to what D'Este calls the Normandy myth, how the official story got written.
Exactly. He shows how Eisenhower's own official reports, written soon after the war ended, really aimed to preserve Allied unity. So they tended to downplay the controversies, praise Montgomery's command as masterful, even when, other evidence suggested otherwise.
Protecting the relationship.
Precisely. And D'Este points out the British official history was similar, quite one-sided, carefully avoiding much criticism of Montgomery, who was, after all, Britain's best-known war hero.
It's fascinating how those narratives take shape. D'Este suggests Eisenhower's absolute commitment to making the coalition work, his obsession almost with keeping British-American relations smooth, was a huge factor in his public silence on Monty's, let's say, difficult side.
Yeah, he just sidestepped controversy for unity's sake.
And Montgomery himself.
Yeah.
D'Este portrays him as, deeply flawed, personally deceitful, boastful, infuriating, but also incredibly effective, dedicated. It's pretty startling when D'Este reveals Eisenhower actually considered sacking Montgomery during the Battle of the Bulge.
It is. Shows just how strained things got behind the public smiles and handshakes. So what Carlo D'Este's decision in Normandy really drives home, I think, is that this absolutely pivotal campaign was a long way from being the perfectly executed masterpiece Montgomery sometimes portrayed it as later. Instead, it was a battle defined by constant improvisation, by severe, often unexpected challenges, that brutal terrain, the critical manpower shortages, and by vital decisions made under immense pressure, often with incomplete information. It wasn't, as Monty liked to say, unfolding as planned. It was messy. It involved constant adaptation, incredibly brutal fighting, and these deep, simmering disagreements among the leaders.
This deep dive into Carlo D'Este's decision in Normandy, it really does peel back those layers of the official story, doesn't it? It shows the complex, often quite messy reality of one of World War II's most crucial campaigns. Makes you rethink the standard narratives.
It absolutely does. And, it leaves you with a pretty important question, I think. If even a campaign like Normandy, so well documented, a clear victory in the end, still has these deep controversies, these conflicting stories, what does that tell us about the truth we think we know about other major historical events?
That's a really profound thought to end on. It definitely makes you realize how easily things like personal viewpoints, national pride, even just the need for unity can shape how history gets remembered and told. So keep digging, keep asking questions, and keep embarking on your own deep dives into history.